Alright, in this video we're going to talk about quite a few different things. We're going to talk about a continuation of using proxy objects, proxy models, this process where I could potentially work with a concept artist and the work that I do will be fed back to a concept artist and they'll do paintovers on it. So that's one thing we'll talk about. We'll also talk about some extra tools that we haven't really covered yet that were used in creating this vehicle type that you see here. We'll talk a little bit about layers. We'll also talk a little bit about how to set up some lights and set up yourself a scenario to where you can get cameras that you can save off and you can render these things out, so then that way you can present your work well. So let's get started, and the first thing we're going to talk about is the use of proxy models to work with a concept artist so they can actually get their work done as well. So I'm going to hop on over to Photoshop and we'll take a look at this concept piece that Ryoma Tazi did for us, and he just made a side view of what our little creature, his vehicle that he'll be riding in, which is this little kind of boat that he can kind of get behind and pick up and carry, kind of like a wheelbarrow kind of, and push it from land into the water. Then it's also got this aquatic feel where it kind of has a shark look to it. And so this hasn't been fleshed out so, fantastic. It was just a really quick side view, and what I was tasked with doing is taking this side view, turning it into a 3D model, then making some renders that are flat gray, handing that back over to Ryoma so he can take a 3/4 view of the 3D model and then really paint out a more detailed version of what that thing's going to look like. So this process of just taking this side view was pretty similar to what we looked at for our modeling template process. So I just took that image, put it into a square ratio for the image, and then I also built, if you look in the channels, an alpha map for this. So I just went through and outlined that. You can do that with the lasso tool, or you can use the pen tool, and there's quite a bit to learn with the pen tool, so if you're not super familiar with that, you could just use the lasso tool. You could use a hard edge brush to make this shape, and then I just tried to capture a little bit of the shadow information like this in the alpha, so that shows up over Maya. That's not necessary, but you can use the magic wand tool with different tolerance settings to kind of select this. So you can see with the tolerance of 2 it doesn't pick up too much, but I'm holding down shift and adding to that, and if you wanted to increase that to maybe something like 32, it might pick up a little bit too much. Okay, so I'm going to hit undo like that, and you might have to find this sweet spot to where you can kind of select that shadow and get that information. Might pick up just a little bit more like that. And once that was picked up like that, if you you can make a new channel like that, and I'll make this here, or you could just have that selection type. So I'll just make a new channel, and you can see that we've got this. You can actually fill it with a color. So if we tap X to flip-flop these two, I could fill it with a percentage of gray, or I could hit Control L to bring up my levels, and this would allow me to drag this in down here, and I could start to lighten that thing up. So if I already had this white part here, I could just kind of lighten up what the shadow information shows like that. So that's how that was built for this. So I'll tap F to get out of here and just drag these down like this to get them out of the windowed view. And so that's what we're starting with the modeling templates. So let's hop on over to Maya and take a look at this. And so this was just a side view. I'm going to hide this infinity wall that I made, and I'll talk to you guys about that a little bit later. I'll tap 5 to turn off all lighting information as well. Okay, and I will also turn on Wireframe on shaded so you can get an idea of what was created geometry-wise for this. So we've already looked at image planes. I've got them hidden over here, so I can just bring those back, and you can see here is the image after it's been brought in from the Photoshop session that you saw here, And then I also have this little guy that we had from earlier that we made. And so this was the scale of the character. And so what I did was I matched up the scale of this image plane with the scale of our character that we have here. Let me go ahead and hide the ship. I'm going to select it, hit Control H real quick, and then we can go to more of a side view. We'll tap 6 so we can see textures here. Turn off the grid. So that's what was done with this here, to kind of just, you know, match up the scale of this ship drawing to what I thought about the scale of this creature. So if you're working with a concept artist, you probably want to talk to them and, you know, get an idea and make sure that the scale relationship is working correctly. And so I believe that's about the right size for that. And we'll bring back the ship, Shift H, like that. So once the scale is kind of set, let's take a look again at this side view, and I'll tap 4 to go into Wireframe. So you can see that certain aspects of the drawing were followed and matched up pretty close. So the wheels match up pretty close. This little part here for the mouth, some of the teeth match up fairly decent. This cannon was a little bit different from the cannon that we made in the earlier session, so I actually brought that actual cannon that we made into here and placed it on top of here, so that doesn't match up quite so well. This wheel for turning, that matches up fairly decent. The scale of these sails that are going to be on here is a little bit different. That could be kind of worked upon. The length of the ship changed a little bit, and I'll talk to you about why that happened. And this rudder piece is a little bit bigger as well. So at this early stage, if you're working with a concept artist and they give you this drawing, again, it's not everything's set in stone. It's kind of like this collaborative process. You try to follow as much as you can from what you've been given, but once you start to build things in 3D, they might not make complete and total sense. So it's your job to work with that concept artist to make sure that what you're building for this final piece actually works in a three-dimensional way. So the reason the length was increased on the ship here was that there's enough space that this character could, let's see if I rotate him back to 0 here, he could actually stand in the ship like this at the wheel, potentially, right? So this is all just kind of you're doing your best guess or best estimate. I'll put this at translate 0 to get him right in the center there as well, and push this guy down so you can see his feet go about there. So when this guy actually gets built out into real 3D, it's possible that he could actually stand right in this area, and he could steer the ship with this. But then if he needed to sit down, there's enough space and there's enough thickness on this seat to where the character could sit back and just kind of sit there. So this area needed to be extended a little bit, so that's why you see that the distance from here to where the seat actually sits was pulled back a little bit. And so because of that, the length of everything kind of, you know, got pushed back a little bit here. If we take our character and we put him right on the ground plane here, here's the other part. Whenever this character is supposed to take the ship, the initial thought was that these would be like handles like a wheelbarrow, and you could kind of pick the ship up and push it. But it's a bit high up. The look of it looks cool, so we can keep that functionality. But the thought is now that he could lift this up just a little bit and put these things on his shoulder and kind of push it that way. So that's why this distance is a little bit different here. Also had to kind of spread these out a little bit to kind of get the thickness, and that's why this we went through this process of building this little stand-in characters, because the character's not even built yet, but we can get information from this thing that helps us and guides us for making good decisions on for what we're creating here. So that's some of the thought process of getting this ship built. Now you can see I've in here I've got the ship, so everything's grouped under one group for the ship. We've got a middle section for anything that's not mirrored, so like this wheel thing here that you see here, and the seat and the cannon that we had before, and we've got a few pieces on here. This is still being mirrored right here right now, so that's why I built everything on a group that's a left side. And then once that was done, let's just delete this thing. Once everything's created on the left side and it's working, we've already looked at how to go edit duplicate special, where we can duplicate something as an instance and give it a negative scale like that. And currently you might get some weird black shading. That's just a draw bug right now. I did notice that I could make sure we turn on two-sided lighting. That's one thing to do. And then after it's created as an instance, hide the thing, Control H, and then select it again and show it. And that black garbage kind of goes away. So it's just a bug currently. So it seems to get rid of it every time I do that. But now we've got this thing set up just like what we did before in the earlier videos, where now we can you know, just do some part of that. I'll tap B to get soft selection off. So then that way we can model one side and we can see all the proportional changes and things like that after it's done. One other thing that was done for this was open up this left side. So there's actually this where the sail actually attaches. So if I hide this part, we've got just this little cylinder thing here. And then so we have also, I'm going to show these, the sail as if it's closed, and then we have on a layer over here the sail as it's open. So we've got two different groups. You know, you can create a group and you got pieces within there, and we already have looked at quite extensively how we can show and hide those pieces using Control H or Shift H to hide or show things. All right. So the other thing that you can do is use layers for this stuff. So if I have sail open and I click this little button over here, we can make a new layer, and you can always come back and rename it. So if I double click on this thing, and I'll bring it over here so you can see it's off the other monitor, you can give this a name and save it, and you can always change the name later, and you can do some color association with that. And then once it's on a layer, both these things are hidden over here in the outliner, and I can use the layers to turn on or off the visibility of what we're looking at. So that's another way that you can look at things. So just more organization for you. So you can see here I've got the scale, that little guy. I put him on a layer as well, and so I can show or hide that. And then I've got this infinity box or infinity plane. So if I turn on the wireframe display here, you can kind of see what's going on with that. It's just this really big kind of flat plane that's got the corners pulled up. So then that way, whenever you're kind of in close on this thing, you get this nice kind of gradient fall off on the background for whenever you're looking at your stuff, and it just makes it look that much nicer. So that was put on a layer, and then this is set to R. So if it's just clear here, you can select it. If you hit T, click it here, you'll see a T. That puts it in template mode where you can kind of see through it and it's kind of grayed out. You can't really select it or anything, but it's there for visual reference. The other thing is if you tap it again, it'll say R, which is, it looks like it's normal and you can see the visibility of it and it shades just like you would expect, but you can't touch it. So that comes in handy where I've got this thing in the background, I just want it there for a visual thing, but I don't want to ever select a thing, so I can put it on R, and that puts it into a reference mode for us. So you can see now if I drag a marquee along this stuff, it'll never select this thing in the background. So this is just more organizational stuff, but it really kind of helps you when you're starting to get more complex scenes and you're getting a bunch of stuff in there. So definitely explore taking a look at some of those different pieces on there. Okay, so I'm going to hide this ship again, and then we're going to talk about a few different tools that I think would help you in creation for this thing. So I'm going to put the sails closed. I'll turn that on, and then that way when I hide this thing or show it again later, it'll pop up for me. So do Control H with this group, and it's going to hide the entire ship for us. So let's go to the side view, and basically I want to create some kind of piece that's like the whole of this thing. So we've already looked at, I'm going to go through this really quick, how to create with the Create Polygon Tool. So we've got some kind of shape like this, and I'm not going to be too specific about this just because I want to show you this quickly. So you'll have to finesse these things quite a bit more. I'll hit enter, and that'll make our piece of geometry for us, right? And let's go ahead and extrude that. So I'll tap F11, shift, right click, extrude face, and I'll extrude that out. Okay, so this is giving us 1/2 of our object. I'll tap F8 to go into object mode and delete history. Alt Shift D. Again, I'm going to go quick because this is from earlier videos and you really need to start getting quicker at these processes. So I'll call them out, but it's going to go kind of quick. Okay, so we're going to go Edit, Duplicate Special. We've got our negative instance. We'll duplicate that across. So we're getting the start of this thing here. We want to build some kind of thickness for this thing and hollow it out. So we'll select these faces, shift right click, extrude face. We'll do the offset. I'm holding down Control as I click and drag on that. And let's just go ahead and hit G and push down because G is our last command for the extrude. And G one more time here. And let's tap 4 to see wireframe view so we can see kind of what's going on here. And we'll scale this down and move this back a bit. So you're definitely going to have to finesse this a lot more than what I'm doing, but just want to get to the major parts here real quick. So I'll select this face and we'll grow selection, shift, and that's period, or you can see that kind of right arrow kind of looking thing just to grow this out. Hit backspace because I don't need those faces in there. And you remember how we can, vert snap all this to the center? We'll just hit F9 for verts, select these guys, move around right here and here and here. Put it on W for my move tool. Hold on X to temporarily turn on snapping for that. And the reason it's not snapping, double click on these options here for move. And I've changed it from object to world. If we want to snap to the grid, it's always got to be on world. So let's tap X there. And now we've got the beginnings of the shape of this thing. Okay, so nothing new there. What I do want to show you is a tool called the Lattice Deformer, which will allow us to tweak the shape of this and should make it a little bit easier for us to get kind of a cool wedge shape. So I'm going to just make sure I've got my geometry kind of shored up. So I use that MultiCut tool. Remember, you got object mode. You can let's see this. F8 object mode, shift right click, MultiCut tool right there, and we'll just drag from there down, hit enter. And like I said, the next version of mine is supposed to allow you to hit G for your last command. Some of those tools that we're used to working with, just not there yet in this version that I'm using. So I think we also looked at, if we hit F10, if we control right click, we can use the edge ring and split to get a split going down the center. That's possible. And we can click here, hit G to go run a split coming down through here. So now we've got a nice division coming through here. Tap F8, use the MultiCut tool, and come right here. And let's delete the history. We got some history going on here. Alt Shift D, and that's going to delete the history. Okay, so all that was to get us to this point where we can start working with as a shape as a whole. So remember how to convert a selection into one selection type into another. So I want all the verts. So I'm selecting both my objects in object mode. Right click, object mode, and then Control F9 is going to give us all of our verts for that. It's going to convert that selection type for us. Now we're going to go, we've been looking at this polygon menu set. We're going to go to animation real quick because a lot of the deformer tools sit with animation. So we're going to go create deformers, and go to Lattice and go to the option box for this. So let's go reset settings. These are the default settings for this, and you'll see this division stuff going on here pretty soon. I'll go ahead and hit apply, and it's going to give me this kind of box with these kind of divisions, these lines through it. So I know if I put this to 2, this will give me a box here for divisions for 2, 2, 2. If you click on the word middle mouse drag, you can see you can interactively change these values like this. So I can put a split going down the middle here. You can add more. You can add a split going down this way. Now after that box is kind of set up, we can right click on it and say lattice point, and you can see what happens now if we select this point and we move it. It starts to deform the object based off of those lattice points. Let me turn on wireframe on shaded, and that'll help us understand what's going on a little bit better here. So you could take these points here and you can see how you can stretch this thing out like this. If I took the middle points, we could kind of, you know, deform it this way. Got the back pieces like that. If we take this top section here, you can kind of stretch it out that way and change it. So this really comes in handy. The only thing is that I'm not a big fan of this tool is if we make some divisions like this and tweak it, and we're like, I need more divisions, and you come over here and you change that information, it doesn't work so well. So you need to kind of know what you're doing first with the shape before you kind of really set up these divisions, and you just have to kind of live with it after it's been set up. So I want to use it to do some tapering. So I can change these divisions to 2, 2, 2, and that'll give me the simplest shape that I can kind of work with. And now with this, I can just take all these and I can actually scale like this on just this axis, and you can see what it's going to do and how it's going to taper the shape for us like that. Okay, so here's what I was talking about, where this is not exactly what I want. I want some kind of taper up at the top, but I don't necessarily want it through the center. Maybe I want to taper the back of that thing. So that's where I need a division going down the length of this thing, and I need probably something like this. So now I can grab this here, taper that in, take the back, and I can taper that in, and that's getting me closer to the shape that I want. So after I know this is closer to what I want, maybe I want this top part to come even closer than maybe the bottom of this thing. It's possible for you to do that as well. And maybe I want this to spread out just a little bit more at the top, but I want it to come closer to a point here at the bottom. Pull that in like that. Okay. And if I want to flatten this model down, just select the objects on it, and then we can delete history. Alt-Shift-D. And there you go. Now our model has been flattened down. You can see we're getting some weird shading through the model because it's popping through. So that just means we need to readjust our final model after it's been deformed in this way. So I'm going to select this vert right here, and I'm going to move it back a little bit, move this down, and I'll move it in. The thickness is not thick enough for us anymore after we kind of move that thing around. So I'm going to push this thing down like that. That's looking pretty good. I can see that little point sticking through here. So let's push that in a little bit, and then after I have those, I can kind of finesse this a little bit more like that. I think that's looking pretty good. So that's how we can get this thing kind of you know, really kind of tweak out the shape. So again, the only information that I was given was the side view, so it's up to me to figure out the three-dimensionality of this thing and make sure that it's actually working as a three-dimensional object. And that's part of that process that we get to do as artists, where we're working with that concept artist. They've given us some kind of information for it, but we really need to make this thing start working in 3D. So I'd probably want to take these and push it in. So we can turn on the soft mod tool, just tab B, and It's really large right now. I think that's why the whole object is kind of yellow like this. So B, hold down B, and then we can click and drag on the model left or right. And if I zoom out, maybe I can see more of this. It might take a while to get it down to the size that I'm looking for. But there's different ways that we can actually tweak this model here. So if we double click on the move icon over here, we can go down. There is a soft selection method, and you can see fall off type is set to volume. You could do surface. If you do surface, it looks at, see this vert sits here on the surface and it grows out that soft selection off the surface. That's why it doesn't select anything on the inside. So that could come in handy for you if you just wanted to pull out the outer part of this thing. But if you wanted to do volume, then now it looks at that vert sits here in the world and the volume around it. Let's grow that out from that volume. So now when I move it, it moves the inside and the outside together. So it's just, you got to get kind of used to this. And remember, when we're using these tools, it might spread apart the center line. So we're going to have to fix that stuff up a little bit. I can just pull this up just like this to get a little bit of rounding kind of going on in here. And that seems like it's a bit too much for this back part for sure. And I can just tap B to turn this stuff on or off if I have to work with individual verts. Remember though, if we want to sew up this whole center line real quickly, because this is an open edge along the whole thing, we can just double click this and it'll click that edge. Let's convert it into vert types, Control F9, like that, and then snap that back down to the center, like that. Okay. So with the combination of those tools, with the soft mod and using a lattice tool, you should be able to create some pretty complex shapes, and you should be able to do it fairly quickly, fairly easy. And it should make your life a little bit easier for you for that. So tap F8, delete history, make sure there's no history on that thing. So that's how that shape was made. So we'll get rid of these things real quick here. I did want to talk to you about duplication of objects around the center. So I did know that for this part of the wheel, I needed to get a certain thickness on it. Just made a cylinder, did an extrusion on it, and then extruded that back down in here and deleted the inner parts to give us this outer ring here. This cylinder here is pretty easy to understand. This was just another cylinder, you know, with some extrusions on it, and then these are multiple copies of it going around. So we've got in the middle here, I can show you this wheel. All the transformations on it actually sit on this group. So I could put this thing back down to the center if I wanted. So I just tab 0 on that, and you can see how that's going to go right into the center. I'm going to hit undo. And then once it was made in the center, then it was put in a group, and then the group was moved up and rotated into position to move all the different pieces. That just made life a lot easier. So you might run into an instance where you need to do that. So if I go create polygon primitives cylinder, and I'll just go make this kind of long like this real quick and move it up. And I could keep the pivot where it's at. I could just hit Control G and make a new group and put it inside that group if I wanted, and call this Sil 001 like that. And now if I duplicate this thing, remember you can hit Control D to duplicate, and if I put it on rotate and rotate it a certain amount, let's say like -45, and if we hit Shift D, we should be able to get duplicate copies of that thing with that rotation. So that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to select this group and go to Edit, Duplicate. We'll do Duplicate Special. We're going to have to take it off that instance. We'll just make these copies, put back our scale, and then we want to rotate this thing. We were rotating it on the Z, see over here, and we did it -45, like that. So we can hit apply. Oops, wrong thing. Put it on scale. So we need to rotate on Z -45. Hit apply, like that. Okay. So that's the other way of doing it. But then if you know how many copies that you need, you can actually give it a number of copies. So 5. Oops. Actually, select the group, hit apply, and that wasn't enough. If I was using math, I could actually figure that out. Right, so if you know that you're going to be doing this operation quite a bit, you can actually come up here and save the settings, and you can get that. So after everything was created like this, we can select everything, hit Control G, and put that into a group. And now we can move the whole group, and we can rotate the group wherever we want, and that makes it easier, and we can even scale. That makes it easier to kind of create this thing, and once it's created, then we want an easy way to position the thing. So again, if we put our move tool and we set that from not world, which we need for snapping, if we put that to object, now it looks at that group and knows, okay, it's been rotated here, so when you move it, we're going to move it at the angle of that rotation. So that stuff comes in really handy at times as well. So let's keep looking at a few things here. Let's talk about this ship and how we've got a group within here that's got this piece where it's closed and a piece where it's open. So we'll go here and we'll go to the left side that I created. We've got the attachment point for it, and then we also have the sail closed group, and you can see here that the pivot point for this cylinder was set right at the pivot point at this center point of this sphere here, and all these things kind of just sit underneath this group here, right? So the pivot point for the group is also here as well. So this thing, we can start to get an idea of, will this thing actually animate correctly if we put joints in here at some point? We can test it out just with hierarchical information and change the pivot point for it. So this thing rotates about this point like this. This rail here can be rotated, so could the middle one from that point, and then the top could be rotated as well. I think if we select all of them, you can move them together as a group. We've got this cloth piece that was made, so that can rotate as well. So everything can just rotate as a group. And so this closed group was actually made from, started off as this open group for the sails. And to create this cloth piece, these cylinders were just rotated into place. We've got some cylinders here and another cylinder where the points were all merged down to a point here to create this tip for the sphere. So once that was made, we didn't have this cloth like what you see here. But we can go, and if we go back under our Polygon tool and use the Create Polygon tool, we can go under Mesh Tools, Create Polygon tool, and if we hold down V when we start drawing on this thing, that turns on Vert Snapping, and we can snap to this point here, this point here, this point here, and then we could even snap to some point right, oops, let's hit backspace. I want to snap to this point right here, and it seems to be grabbing the grid. So let's just snap somewhere in here. And if it doesn't play so nice, it's actually, okay, so it's creating that to the floor. Let's hit undo real quick. Let's just hide this infinity plane and make sure that that's not causing any kind of issue. So hold down V, and it does appear to be snapping to, there's my problem. I run into this every now and then. For whatever reason, I went to go turn on V to do vert snapping, and it accidentally got turned on. So if it's on like that, it's just like on all the time. And so when I held down V, it did the opposite of that. So let's make sure that thing's off. Hold down V, turn on vert snapping, so it should snap to that point that we got there. Okay, good, everything's working. Hold down V, snap to there, hold down V, snap to here, V, and snap to here. And remember, we got that dotted line. If we want to complete this tool, we can hit enter like that. Now here's something interesting. We've got ambient occlusion, screen space ambient occlusion turned on, and it's shading black like that. That should be a real quick indicator for me that something's not right. The normals are facing the wrong way. So it draws correctly from this side. I want the normals to be facing out this way. So we can go to polygons, normals, and reverse. Okay, so we've got that. We can delete the history on this. Tab W, and we'll put on the Vert tool, and then we can snap this up to the center. That's why I made this piece here. If I go to the front, I should be able to snap it to any one of these points here. See right there? That's the center point for that cylinder that I created for the attachment point for the sphere. If I go to the side view, let's go here, then we should see some center point right here that I can snap to. So I just hold down V and move this right here. And now this thing should be snapped up down through the center of this. Okay. Then from there we could use the shift right click over object mode and do the MultiCut tool. Just drag that thing out here, enter like that. And with the MultiCut tool, you can hold down shift, and you can see it's going to snap to these increments along the line. So we can do 50%, drag out here, hit enter, drag here, hold down shift, hit enter, and then now I want to get these points pulled in, right, and give some kind of arch kind of look to it. So I can select my verts, and if I scale just by the point here, it's possible to do it that way. But what I really want is my pivot point to go down to the center. So to make life a little bit easier, I'm just going to move this thing out of the way, kind of like that, just to not get confused with anything else. So we'll hit F9, select our verts, and if we'll put on the scale tool, any one of these tools, while you're working with a group of components, it's possible that you can change the pivot point of what you're working with. So remember to hit insert to change pivot point. We'll hold down V and snap down to this point here, and then hit insert. And now when I scale down using the uniform scale tool, it'll scale it down to those points that we got down here. So we've just built up this arch. Okay, so this is going to be something that you might use quite a bit. If I hit the object, and you might notice when you're modeling, if you accidentally tap 3, it puts it in a smooth mesh preview mode. And what it's actually doing is adding more divisions to each one of these polygons and then smoothing the result of that. So we could use that to our advantage. I'll just tap 3, and then under mesh tools, we'll do creasing tool right here like this. And we can select F9, we can select a point, and you can middle mouse drag left or right to change the pole of that interactively. So I can just right click on that, take it all the way up to the hardness on there, and then I can select this point and drag it down here. So that looks pretty cool, right? And we can actually even select these verts now, and we can pull them forward just a little bit in Z, and now we've got this nice pillowing effect along through here. You can even use, we looked at verts for the crease tool. You can also go to crease tool, and you can crease an edge as well. So take a look at that, and we'll turn off this wireframe on shaded, and so you can see it's going to build up some cool geometry for us. Now we can tap 1 and it still gives us back our normal object. We'll delete history on that. If we tap 3, so this is just a preview display kind of thing. If you actually want to convert this into actual geo, you're going to go to Modify, Convert, Smooth Mesh Preview to Polygons. And you can see, now you can actually see these divisions. Now it does have information over here in the channel box that you can click on this and tap 1, tap 0, and that's going to get you back down to your base for these divisions. Tap 1, tap 3, and you could even keep going. You want to be careful not to add too many divisions to the thing, but you can see how it's basically taking that original geometry that we had and is adding those divisions to it like this to give this smoothness. So let's put that on 2 like that. That's a pretty nice number. And then I'll put this at 0 like this. So that's how the sails were made for this thing. And once you're done, if you're happy with it, you can hit Control Alt Shift D, and we're going to delete history on that. And you see these little marks, that's telling you that that's the creasing information for this thing, like that. So put back here for the cloth. Something else that you might need is the Append to Polygon tool. So I'm going to go to the top and I'm going to go create, actually sorry, I'm going to go to create Polygon tool from right here, and let's just say we had point, something like the whole of the ship again, like that, and we'll extrude this thing out like this. And let's just take this part here and open it up. Okay, and I'm going to give some divisions here. Just continue this thing out. So let's say we've got this open part to our model and we need to close this thing up. So we've already looked at extruding something, so you can extrude the edges on this here. We could extrude edges if you don't have a face. I'll put that on world mode and give a thickness and an offset like that, and we can merge all the points together and clean it up, but that's that's a lot of work. So there is a tool that you can use to actually close up edges. So if we shift right click on here, we've got same place where we've got some of these other tools that we've been using. We've got the Append to Polygon tool, and this thing, once you click on any boundary edge, it'll kind of tell you what to do here. You can see we've got this arrow for this direction. So if I go from here to here, I can make a polygon here like that, right? So that's possible. I'll just hit G for my last tool, because again, object mode, shift right click, Append Polygon tool. See the direction? I can keep following this thing around and keep sewing this thing up. So I could hit enter for that, tap Y for my last tool or last command, and keep going around, and I can just close that thing up like that. So that's possible. Let's get rid of these faces here, and I'll do G for last command. So you saw I did that in sections. It's possible you can do it in sections, or you can keep going around the entire perimeter and close that thing off, and now we've got a new shape for a face that we've made. And then now it's possible that we can, extrude this thing, give the offset, extrude that thing in, like that. We're building up that thickness like that. So the Append to Polygon tool will definitely come in handy in quite a few different scenarios for you. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that tool. Okay, so I'm going to bring everything back, and we're going to pause the video, and then we're going to talk quickly about how we can set things up for a nicer looking display showing off our models. Okay, so now that we have an understanding of how some of these things were created, let's talk a little bit about how we can get to this last stage of showing off our work and having a more kind of polished, professional kind of look to things. So let's talk about this infinity kind of wall that we have here. So earlier in the video I showed you how to use the smooth mesh preview by tapping an object and tapping 3. If you tap 1, we can kind of see what's going on here. I'm going to tap 5 to turn off lighting information. And this was just created with a flat plane. And you can see we've got some clipping issues with our camera. Let's talk about this real quick. This is an annoying thing inside of Maya, but it's just part of what you have to do to get things working. So if we select our camera, hit Control A, we've got these clipping planes, and you can see there's a far clip plane. If we push that value out, you can see that that plane kind of goes through. So if we do, that was set to 1, if we do 1 and a 5 here, you can see it pushes out a little bit further. So that's too thin here, so we can go 200. Let's do another value here, like that. And it's basically these planes that push through the world, and it tries to cull out anything after a certain distance for performance reason. There's also a near clip plane as well, and you can see the object kind of shimmers a little bit. I wasn't getting a very good value with this. Sometimes I had to set this to maybe 1. You see that kind of made things go away and felt a little bit better. So that's the clipping plane. I wish I didn't even have to show that to you, but it's just something to kind of know and understand what's going on here. So we got this flat plane. If I tap 3, we can view this thing in the smooth mesh preview mode. And the way that this was created, it was very simple. We'll just go to create polygon primitives, and we'll do a plane option box, and then we'll do width and height. We'll just do 100 divisions. We'll do 10 and 10 and axis Y like that. And let's just move this thing up and scale it out quite a bit. So it's got to be really large for us. And then it was really easy to select that outer perimeter. Hit F10, double click that, and that's going to give us this outer perimeter. So we could just move this thing up like that, tap 3, and you can see what it's going to build for you. But it is possible that we can move it up just a little bit, and then tap B to use the soft selection mode, and then grow that thing out by holding down B and clicking and dragging left or right like that. And then we can really kind of pull that out. I'll double click this outer edge again and shrink that amount that it's kind of affecting there. And then once we get this thing kind of scaled up so large, you can just set the camera inside of it, and it's going to build some of that nice shading for you. The other thing is maybe just pull up those edges pretty darn high like that after a certain point, and then maybe grow this thing out a little bit more. Then that way, you know, like if you're sitting down inside this thing, you're never really going to have to worry too much about viewing outside of the thing. And you can just, for rendering purposes and everything else like that, you can just leave it in the smooth mesh preview mode. But if you really wanted to convert that, again, we can go to modify, convert smooth mesh preview to polygons. But I was just leaving it there like that. So that's going to give me my infinity wall. I select it, and if I put that on a layer, make a new layer, and set that to reference type, I can see it, but I can't select it. So that's going to give me my infinity wall that we've got here. The other thing is turning on and off this ambient occlusion, the screen space ambient occlusion. So that usually gives a nicer look and gives you some of these contact points and shadows. And you can see it doesn't play so nice with alpha on our character, so that's something to kind of be aware of. The other thing is making sure that we have anti-aliasing turned on. And we can get to all these options either through here, or we can go to Render Viewport 2.0 and go to the option box for that. And you can see that you've got the screen space ambient occlusion. We can turn that on or off, just like we're doing up in here. So that's giving you access to that. And then anti-aliasing, making sure that we have that turned on. It's this little thing here. And those just make things look a lot nicer for you. While we're here, we might as well take a look at this light limit. So while we're in Viewport 2.0, you can tell it to have 8 real-time lights. And if you want to ever have any more, you can push that up, but you will have to note that that has an effect on performance. So here's my different cameras. I always like to just leave the normal camera and don't like to change the name of the perspective camera, because when Maya starts up, it's expecting that name here. So I always usually just, you can take that camera and duplicate it and make sure you're not doing an instance. So if you just Control D and duplicate the camera, you can do that and give it a name. And I like to use this perspective working camera, so I always know that this is my perspective camera that I'm using, and it's just a working camera to do work with. The other one is used for setting up maybe renders and things like that. So you should be able to just middle mouse drag in there. Sorry, I'm going to tap the bracket key left and right. We'll cycle through the different movements that you've done in your camera. I didn't want to set that up. So here's my perspective camera, and I've actually set up a keyframe on this thing to go from a front view to a back view like this. So you can see your timeline should be down here, and if you just select your camera, move it, set up a shot, and I went over here to these values and select the top one, hold down Shift and right click, and you say key selected, and it'll set keyframes for the position and rotation of your camera. And then I drag the time slider, just click and drag to some other value here. I've set mine to 100. You can change this out if you wanted to something else different, but I just needed 2 keyframes. So I drag all the way to the end here, and then reposition my camera, just like you're looking through it, and say I'm happy with that shot. And then you can just come up here, click, hold down Shift, click, right click, say key selected, and now you've got a little camera motion actually. But if I'm going to render something out, I always know on frame 0 I want this, and then on frame 100 I'm going to render out this shot here. So that's a way of setting up, even with one camera, multiple shots or different angles that you're going to need to get back to over and over. Because if I render these things out and I give them to the concept artist, he might need some different version, so I want to get back to that stuff. So that's why I got a working camera and then a camera just for setting up shots and things like that. The other thing is setting up lights. So it's pretty easy to come up here and say create lights, and I'm just going to use either point lights or we'll do spotlights. So I'll do spotlight with an option here. We'll do cone angle and a penumbral angle, and I'll show you what that looks like. So we need to make sure that we can actually see lights. I have lights turned off, so under show you can turn on or off the display of like the little icons for different things on here. So have lights turned off. That just kind of gets in the way visually after they're set up. So I can see lights, and now I can just click and middle mouse drag this spotlight into the scene, and I actually can look through the light itself and know this is what my light is actually going to be pointing to. So a lot of times it's easier to set up a light and just imagine the light as a camera. So what we set up with the create lights spotlight option box was we've got a cone angle. So this inner angle is, imagine a cone going out from a spotlight. This is the inner cone, and this penumbral angle gives, this is pure 100% light, and then this falls off from 100% down to 0. So it gives you a nice kind of gradient and kind of fall off like that. So we could middle mouse drag that thing in there, or you can select it and you can say look through selected like that. So I think you can look through more things than just a light, but that's what I mainly use it for. So I'm going to go back to panels perspective and go back to my perspective camera, and we'll hit S7 to turn on lighting for everything. Okay, so the other thing I have is cast shadows on, and I know for viewport 2.0, let's look at the options for this light. Hit Control A to bring up the attribute editor, and there should be a tab called shadows. We'll open that up. You can change the shadow color, like you could actually tint this to a color if you wanted to, or if you want to lessen how dark that shadow is, you could drop that back a little bit. I'm telling it to use depth map shadows. I think the default is something like 512, and we could drop that down like that. And you can see it's going to make it kind of blurry because I've got this filter size, and I think the default starts here. This is going to give you really harsh shadows, so your shadow is probably going to look something ugly like this. Take your filter size and drag it over there, and it softens up the shadows. Now, the resolution of the shadow, you can see that's kind of blocky and kind of nasty. I usually go multiples of, so it's 512, 1024 is the next step up, or 2048. will go up, or you can do 4096, and I wouldn't go any higher than 4096. But you can see as it increases in the resolution, you can't get that soft effect anymore. So it's kind of like a little bit of a balancing act for that. So the other thing I set is decay rate. Usually it's set to no decay, but if I put a decay rate of linear, and you can see I crank up this intensity, I've got it set to like 600. You can just play with these values. So basically this is giving a fall off from where the light actually sits. And let's see, let's find that icon. So the icon sits right up here, so we've got the fall off from the light. So it's coming up here, and you can see it's going to fall off linear, and whatever the unit system is set up for is set to 600. So that's why it's brighter here, and as it goes into the world, that light actually fades off and fades out. So I like that effect with the lights. I think that's more realistic. If you have a realistic light, it doesn't go off and have the same intensity forever. There's going to be some kind of fall off for that intensity for the light. So the other thing I created were these little point lights. So if we go to create lights, point light, that's how one of these were set up, and then you can move that around in through the world. So I've got my main light, and I'm setting up some bounce light and some kind of fill light on the other side. I don't want it to be 100% black back here. So we've got this kind of fill light back here, just still using a color of white on this thing, and the intensity is pretty high because I'm using a decay rate of linear like that. If you use quadratic, it falls off a lot quicker, so this value will change from something like 50 to like 200s to maybe even 1,000 or something like that. So it just depends on what your fall off rate is. I've turned off emit specular because I don't want this thing to affect the specular component of the shader. Specular is going to be that nice white kind of highlight thing. We can turn that off to where it's just affecting the diffuse and basically kind of lighting up that area. So with these point lights, I'm turning off to where it's not emitting specularity. So once one's kind of set up, that I can just duplicate it, Control D, and move it around. And so I've got a little bit of fill here and here and here. So that's how just a real simple kind of lighting setup was set up for these. Let's just look at these values real quick. So this is only 11. This is 11 as well. So is this one. The backside one was the one that had quite a bit more value on here to kind of light up this backside. Okay, and I also keyed the position and rotation of each one of these lights too. So with this shot, I liked this lighting scenario for this, so I keyed that. And then when I went to this other camera view, let me hide this here, I changed the position of the spot, the shadow casting light and these point lights, and then I gave a key for that as well. So then those light positions actually change as it goes from here to here as well, and Maya figures out all the in-between stuff for you and figures all that out. So that's really nice. Okay, so once those set up, let's talk about the resolution gate here for like how something's going to render out. So if you go up to this little display render settings icon here, you can click on that, and that's going to open up this window. This is what it's going to tell you, what are you going to render with. So if you don't want to mess with anything, you can just put it on My Hardware 2.0 and it'll render out exactly what you see here in the viewport and the viewport 2.0 stuff. So that comes in handy. I'm not going to render out any kind of animation stuff, so let's just keep it really simple. We'll keep the image size. If we turn this thing off, you can set it to some custom thing. So I wanted to do a resolution that's twice as big as 1920 by 1080. So I basically just set that to 1920 by 1080, turned on maintain width and height ratio, and then with a calculator just figured out, doubling that size and entered one of the numbers here. And because I have maintain width and height ratio on, it's going to fill out that other part for me automatically. Okay, so we can do that, or we can do Maya software. I'm not going to get into the settings too much on here, but if we go to this tab over here, you can just set the quality to production quality, and I like to put my filtering for the edges and everything to this box filter. It's just personal preference. The other ones might kind of blur the edges just a little bit more. But with those settings, you should get everything, and everything should render fairly decent for you. That's all I did for these, for rendering out some of these shots. Now to actually render out a frame, we can come here to the Open Render View thing here, and we've got some options on here for test resolution. My resolution stuff is pretty high, so I could even take it down just for test purposes to 25% of this thing, and then I can come up here and tell it to render a camera. I usually like to render a snapshot before I actually do an actual render, and I'll do a snapshot of the perspective camera that we have set up. So it's going to give you a little wireframe kind of preview of what it is that you're going to render, and then now we just click the little render button and it's going to render. And you can see here I am rendering with Maya, the Maya software. Okay, what if we want to render with Maya Hardware 2.0, which is really this Viewport 2.0 thing, which renders really quick? You can do that, and you can see it's going to give you this look that you have here, just like that. And definitely want to make sure I've got anti-aliasing turned on, which I do. So we can go to this option, test resolution, and we'll put it on 1920 by 1080, do another render of this thing. And you see I'm not zoomed in 100% on there. If you want to click 1:1, you can see that. The reason I was rendering at twice the resolution of what I actually really need is because still some of these edges get tore up a little bit, and if I render it twice the size that I need, I can go into Photoshop and then just reduce that by 50%, and it kind of gives me better looking anti-aliasing, at least for the Viewport 2.0 stuff. If we do Maya software, again, Maya is going to be handling the rendering for this stuff and probably doing a better job than the Hardware 2.0. It just takes a lot longer to render, and you have different issues that you kind of worry about. So I'm going to go to those settings. It looks like to me this Maya software, this multi-pixel filter, not a fan of that. So let's put this pixel filter 1 and 1, because it looks like everything's kind of soft for my liking. So we'll render that real quick and take a look and see if that cleans up our edges just a little bit for us. Yeah, so it does. So this works pretty good for still images, but if you are rendering animations, the reason they've got that set a bit higher is because you can get kind of sizzle along some of your edges and stuff like that in an animation. So that's just kind of why that's there. But I think at this stage, that's enough for you to kind of think about, to worry about right now for this stage, for just setting up lights, setting up some anti-aliasing, being able to use either Maya Viewport 2.0 to render with, or you could render with Maya software. The last thing is, after we've done this test resolution, we could go and put this at the real size, do our final render like this. And it's going to take a second, obviously, because we're doing a lot larger resolution. And we can look at it 1:1. We can middle mouse click with Alt, and we can pan this around. I get a little nervous about doing this because I've had Maya crash on me a lot of times for whenever I zoom in and out. So you can zoom in and out like you normally would in any orthographic view. But like I said, I get a little nervous by that. We can kick out our image by just saying File, Save Image, and this will give us this dialog where we can save it out as a file format. I like to use Targa, and then you can just save out the file anywhere you want. Open that inside of Photoshop. The other thing to note that might be helpful for you, if we take off the background on this and we render this thing again, like this, let's let it render out. I know it's going to render against this dark background here like that, but if we click on this, you can see it's actually going to make an alpha channel for us, which comes in kind of handy. So whenever we actually save this thing out, and we save it as a Targa file, let me just close that. That always confuses me if I do the option box for that thing. Just say Save Image and tell it where to save, and once you save it out, it's going to save the color along with the alpha channel. So I usually do 2 renders. We've got one with the kicking out the alpha channel, and then maybe one with this background piece with the infinity wall. And then in Photoshop you can make 2 copies of this and then take the one and separate it from the background, and now you've got your ship to where it's separated from the background. If you want to do some special stuff to it, that's an easy way for you to get that Targa file. with the alpha channel and get you that functionality inside of Photoshop. So there's some different real quick best practices for how you can quickly set up cameras, store some camera positions, set keyframes for that, set up some lights real quick, key the positions for that, and then using Infinity Wall with some of these layers, you can actually get yourself a setup to where you can always render this stuff out. You can always get back to those shots, and it's just going to make the production process go a lot smoother for you and everybody that you're working with. So let's take a look at some of the final results from us sharing our model with the concept artist, and then the concept artist actually painting over the top of the model to give us the final look of what this thing is going to look like whenever it's handed off to somebody that's going to model it completely out and do all the textures and things. So what we started off with was these renders that we kicked out to the concept artist, and they went through with their painting skills and painted on top of things to give us this look that we see here. So obviously we've got a lot more information to start working with for the next stage, and we'll be able to see what kind of geometry that we might have to add to our model and what different types of textures and materials and things like that we'll be using for this. So there's that view. We also have this view with the sails open on it like this, and then we also kicked out a rear view like this, and you can see how this was taken and then painted over the top of to give the artist the next step of information that they're going to need to build this thing out completely. Okay, so this is a really nice way of working in a team structure that will get you to where you can quickly model something out that can be shared amongst your team, and that proxy model could actually be brought into your game, and you can start figuring out information for scale, things like that. Is it going to work within the environment? So designers could actually look at it and use it for things, and then you could also share that with your concept team, and that can push you to the next stage in the evolution of the design for whatever it is that you're working on.